we want to revolutionize infertility, and so we're trying to build from the ground up to have a company that will endure for the long term and also can innovate, because I think that there will be a lot of innovation in this field over the coming decades. I think the mission of the company right now is to allow parents that want to have kids to be able to have those kids, and to make it more accessible to the extent we can to the people that already have other options. And that's quite a big goal, and it's quite hard to move the field forward. But yeah, that's the main mission of the company right now.
This is the Nucleate Podcast, the voice of the next generation of biotech leaders.
Welcome to the Nucleate Podcast. My name is Sam Kessel, and on this episode, I have a conversation with Merrick Smela, Chief Scientific Officer, and Travis Potter, Chief Executive Officer at Ovelle. Dr. Merrick Smela received his PhD at Harvard University's Chemistry and Chemical Biology program, where he joined the Serrani lab. There, he invented new ways of converting human pluripotent stem cells into ovarian cells. Beyond this work, he completed a master's degree at the University of Cambridge and currently holds authorship on over 25 publications. Travis Potter has nearly 14 years of experience as a managing director at Goldman Sachs and spent several years at a hedge fund. He completed his bachelor's degree at Cornell University in engineering physics, then pivoted into finance for nearly 20 years. In 2024, he left his role to join Merrick on a new venture, Ovelle. Together, Travis and Merrick founded Ovelle, the first company to induce meiosis in induced pluripotent stem cells. This is a critical step in providing effective, affordable fertility treatment for more people than ever. We are grateful to have Travis and Merrick here on the Nucleate Podcast and to learn more about how Ovelle is changing the face of reproductive technology and combating infertility. Merrick and Travis, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So let's kick off with a couple questions for you, Merrick. What were your experiences like as a kid, and how did these early experiences influence your decision to pursue a career in research?
Yeah, well, so I've been interested in just science in general from a very young age. Like, I would do chemistry experiments in my parents' basement. Thankfully, I did not burn down the house, but came close a few times. Was interested more in chemistry through high school and early college, but starting to get into bio a bit as well, because I thought it was really cool that you could build all sorts of interesting things with biology that's affects health, affects like agriculture, materials, things like that. So I was starting to get more into bio, and then found out about stem cells and reproductive biology in particular. So that point where I sort of knew I wanted to work in vitro gametogenesis, which is the process of going from a stem cell to an egg, that came around 2016 when I saw a paper from a Japanese lab that successfully carried this out in mice. So taking a mouse stem cell and growing healthy mice eggs from that. So that's sort of the short version of how I got interested in this area, basically.
So you've been around in the field for a while, right? Since 2016. I'm curious, when you were part of founding Ovelle, can you tell us a little bit about what that was like while you were still finishing up your PhD?
Yeah, so it was a rather interesting process, right? So around 2023, I'd published a paper about making ovarian supporting cells from stem cells, and Travis actually saw it, and at the time he was interested in this research area, which I'm sure he can tell more about in a few minutes. But he emailed me basically out of the blue and said, like, hey, like, I want to talk to you. This sounds really cool. So we emailed. I think we met like once or twice. And then later I published another preprint at this point. This was 2024. And Travis reached out again and said, this is really cool, we should start a company. And it was sort of a slow process of like getting to know him well enough to be confident that this was the right choice. But I think it's turned out really well. So we started the company, like we filed for incorporation last August, so about a year ago actually. And then actually started wet lab operations in February once I wrapped up my PhD. And it's been off to a good start, I would say.
Yeah, and it seems like very exciting progress that you all have made. So, Travis, let's pivot to you and your experience. So, you're coming at this from a completely different angle, from the finance business side. Tell me a little bit more about your background, and I know that you spent, north of a decade, 15 years or so at Goldman Sachs in investment banking, and then as a hedge fund manager. Very curious to hear about how you pursued initially a career in finance, and then how you ultimately decided to pursue this career at Ovelle.
Sure. So in undergrad, I was not a bio major. I was a physics major. And physics majors at that time, when I graduated in 2005, kind of did one of two things. They went and get a PhD or they went to Wall Street. So I went to Wall Street and I spent 15 years there, as you said. I ended up as a senior manager at Goldman. And then a little bit after that, I was working at a hedge fund. But like a lot of people on Wall Street, I started having kids a little bit later in life. And I started thinking a lot about having kids and what it means to have kids and this sort of thing. And particularly for our second one, my wife and I struggled a little bit, and I started learning a little bit about IVF, and I started wondering why IVF was the protocol has gotten more efficient, but it's mostly the same since it was invented in 1978. And why is it the same as it was then? And then I started learning about IVG, and IVG just struck me as something that could solve so many people's problems. And many people on Wall Street talk about their IVF stories, because a lot of people were delaying having kids because the careers there are so demanding that you generally don't have them earlier in life. And the other thing at the time is I just calculated that I'd estimated that there's $100 million globally when I started looking at it that had gone into IVG research, which may sound like a large number, but when you're managing like $1 billion budget, a yearly budget on Wall Street, you're like, wow, this is like no money at all. This is amazing that how little support this area is getting. And so eventually I decided I should try to throw my hat in the ring and lend more support to the field, because I felt it was important.
So your inspiration was really based on your personal experience, and that in your experience with IVF and wanting to make it easier for couples like yourself to have children.
Yeah.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, did your experience at Goldman Sachs, was that helpful for you at all? Was it at all biotech related, or was there any connection at all? Or you're like, I have some financial skills, I want to build a business?
So I think obviously it didn't really prepare me for the biotech background, but I do think there's a lot of commonalities about building a business, which is raising capital, building great teams, communication. And I think in particular for IVG, another commonality with finance is that finance was very heavily regulated. There was all sorts of different rules and regulations, and you had to make sure that everyone was, compliant at all times. And I think that will also carry over to IVG. I've noticed that actually a lot of successful biotech companies have this sort of partnership that Merrick and I have, where there's somebody with very, very deep technical expertise, and then there's somebody with deeper business expertise, because I think that successful companies need both sides, and it's really, really hard to have it all in one person.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of different unique perspectives that someone coming to biotech with a more business mindset can add to the conversation. And obviously, a lot of biotechs are built on critical science that needs funding in order to survive. So definitely understand that expertise. And I would say, Merrick, from your perspective as a scientific co-founder, what were the key skills besides the science itself that you bring to the startup in terms of how you're thinking about experimental design and how to think differently than you did in your academic experience in a business setting?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned experimental design, right? So I guess one thing is I've been working in the field of IVG since my master's in 2018, right? So in terms of the technical skills, I basically have a clear idea of the scientific questions that we need to resolve in order to make this work. And then also some sense of the engineering things, how do we make this more scalable? How do we go faster? How do we make it higher quality? So experimental design is definitely an important thing there. A lot of people use statistics as a way to analyze data after you do the experiment, but it's equally as important to use statistics to help set up an experiment in the first place, so you can maximize the information that you get. And then also just being able to train people is very important. Like if we hire somebody, we generally hire for someone who's intelligent and can learn new things quickly. There's actually not a lot of people who have pre-existing skills in the areas that we need. So being able to train someone who's just generally a good scientist, but not necessarily with his specific skills, the training is very important as well. So I think those sorts of things are what I bring in terms of the things I'm contributing.
That's great. And just out of curiosity, we've talked to some folks who've made the leap from academia to the startup land. I'm assuming it's a very different mindset for how you're thinking about, in addition to executing experiments, just a different philosophy, right? To my understanding, it's a lot more action-oriented. You have, you're not able to just do full inquiry on every single thing that might be potentially relevant for a paper. It's going to be more of a focused research topic. Is that your experience, or?
Yeah, maybe. Although I would say actually during my PhD, I was also operating in that focused research mode quite a lot, because my number one passion is I want to make an egg. And not just one egg. I want to make lots of eggs so people can basically solve infertility. So I mean, even in my PhD, I was working towards that goal, and I was definitely doing lots of basic research, but it was always with that thing in mind. So I don't actually think it's that big of a transition for me. Starting Ovelle, it's sort of also how I was operating during my PhD, I would say.
Fantastic. So Travis, for our audience who's not familiar with in vitro gametogenesis and perhaps doesn't have deep scientific background in that space, can you tell us a bit about what Ovelle's mission is? We've talked about it a little bit in passing, and in vitro gametogenesis. Can you just give us a primer from your perspective on it?
Yeah, so in vitro gametogenesis is a process of creating eggs that can be fertilized and implanted just like IVF, but from normal cells. So as Merrick talked about, this was first done in mice in 2016, where a stem cell from a mouse was made into an egg, and then it was fertilized and implanted, and those went on to have healthy mouse pups. And it would be a revolution in infertility treatment in the US if we were able to get it to work, for a couple of different reasons. First is that there's a large population of people for whom IVF doesn't work. This is people like cancer survivors. I have a friend, for example, who is a cancer survivor of ovarian cancer, and she had her ovaries removed, and unfortunately they didn't plan ahead enough. And so the IVG would be the only way she could have a kid. And then there's other people that are have a low ovarian reserve, polycystic ovarian syndrome, things like this. And then we hope for one day this to be an alternative to egg retrieval for IVF, because it would be a simple tissue sample, and that tissue can then be made into an unlimited number of eggs. So you could avoid hormone treatments and semi-surgical procedure to retrieve the eggs. And then the uncertain number of eggs you get from an IVF cycle. Many people have to go through multiple cycles, and it's a little bit of an emotional roller coaster. Like, how many eggs did I get? How many healthy embryos is this? Do I have to do this again? And so we think that IVG would be a significant advance on IVF.
Fantastic. And you can definitely see how there's many medical conditions, you mentioned cancer among them, that for some people would prevent them from having kids. And it also sounds like it would be even beyond just allowing people who are not able to have children with IVF. It could also be a superior alternative to IVF, because you wouldn't have to go through as many of those hormone cycles to produce eggs. Even you could have tissue be used to produce egg cells and then be implanted, rather than having to deal with the hormonal cycles necessary to produce an excessive number of eggs that is necessary with IVF. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. We hope that, I think that when it's first approved, only people with no alternative to IVF will use it, because it's sort of new, and it's your kid. You want your kid to have the best start, so you're going to go with the tried and trusted thing. and it's only people without an alternative that will adopt it. But I think eventually, if those people have good experiences, then people who would otherwise use IVF may consider switching, probably will consider switching eventually.
Got it. No, and that's fantastic especially for the people who cannot currently have children. It's going to create a whole new alternative option that didn't exist. So that's fantastic. So Merrick, I think this is more a question to you. When it comes to the scientific process, the approach that you're using at Ovelle, can you tell us a little bit about what is unique about this and how the trajectory is from a research perspective to go from where you are today to where you hope to be longer term, where this is implemented broadly?
Sure. Yeah. So the specific approach that we're taking at Ovelle is to try to find gene regulatory factors. So this includes things like transcription factors, which are often used in cell type reprogramming. But beyond transcription factors, things like RNA binding proteins, kinases, signaling receptors. Basically, we want to find the regulatory factors that we need to generate a particular cell state or developmental process, and then activate those regulatory factors in order to make that happen. So, for example, the recent research that I've done on meiosis, I identified a set of regulatory factors that can initiate meiosis starting from stem cells, and this process takes only about 12 days to get meiosis started, which is actually a lot faster than alternative methods, which instead of directly activating the regulatory factors, they will try to find like the natural signaling conditions that will have this process happen. The downside is that the natural biology of egg development is quite slow. So if you start from an embryo, you would have to wait about 14 years or more in order to get mature eggs out at the end, if you wanted to follow the entirely identical process that happens inside a woman's ovaries. And if you are a patient, you don't want to wait that long to get an egg that you can use. I think most people don't want to wait like 14 years to get their egg. You can probably speed that up with additional growth factor treatments on the cells, but at the end of the day, I think the direct regulatory factor expression approach will provide faster but also more precise methods for generating the cell types that we need. So that's basically the approach that we're taking at Ovelle, and so far it's been working out quite well, I would say.
Yeah, and for this episode, we're really excited to take a look at the preprint of your paper, but by the time this episode comes out, our audience will be able to see it. In Science Advances, full title is Initiation of Meiosis from Human iPSCs under Defined Conditions Through Identification of Regulatory Factors. So I think this paper does go through some of the stuff that you already just highlighted, but can you tell us what the major innovation with this paper is? And it's definitely worth noting that George Church is one of the PIs on this paper.
Right, yeah, so again, this was from my PhD, which I recently completed from the Church Lab. Basically, the goal of the paper was to find conditions that could activate meiosis from stem cells. So meiosis is the process where the eggs get the correct number of chromosomes, basically. So every cell in your body has two sets of chromosomes, one inherited from your father and one inherited from your mother. But eggs and sperm, they need to transmit just one copy of each chromosome. In meiosis, what happens is the two copies of each chromosome, they basically pair up and recombine with each other in order to generate that haploid contribution to the next generation. So we wanted to have this process happen in stem cells. So what I did was looked at basically single-cell sequencing data from human fetal ovaries, which was a previously published data set from the UK, and predicted which regulatory factors were associated with meiosis. Then I developed a screening approach to basically have a pool of these factors integrated into stem cells, and then be able to sort out which factors could activate meiosis. And through refining this approach, I was able to identify several factors that can activate meiosis in stem cells. So we've gotten about halfway through meiosis with this method, and we're currently working on basically finishing the process of meiosis. But even the initiation, we can do a lot faster than basically any other method that's been tried.
Fantastic. And this, you said, was part of your PhD. When it comes to Ovelle, what would you say the progress has been to date? Where do you stand since this paper has been published, or is this all part of one thing?
Yeah, so we've been working on a few different things at Ovelle, including making the meiosis work better. I can't share particular methods, but I'll say in general that we've made the meiosis process more efficient and more streamlined. And we've also made progress in a few other areas as well.
Fantastic. And Travis, I believe this question more for you. Ovelle currently has roughly 6 employees. Please correct me if there's a new update there. But what was the process of forming the team like outside of you two as co-founders, and how have you thought about bringing on employees, collaborators, and how to make progress for Ovelle?
Yeah, so before I started Ovelle, I was living in Manhattan, and I've moved to Boston as part of this. And part of the reason I moved to Boston to do it is because Boston is one of maybe the world's center for biotech research. So from the beginning, we had a very high emphasis on finding very good, talented scientists to help us. And so we've just been it's the same advice that any entrepreneur or any business owner will give you, which is just being very slow to hire, make sure you're getting the right people, make sure they're super talented. And for us in particular, committed to the mission, because it's a very mission-driven company. I think that if you don't believe in the mission, there's no reason to come here and do it. But I think it's very, very important. So screening for all those things, talented scientists, believe in the mission, and can obviously do what we need them to do. And the other thing I guess we were looking for is the ability to innovate, which because this process is solved in mice, but it's not completely solved in humans. You need to innovate, and not everyone has that skill set or wants to do that.
I would add that we have a great team here. One of our first employees, Jessica, was actually working with me in George Church's lab during my PhD. So she joined Ovelle, made the same leap from academia to industry. So I'm very proud of the team we have here.
So am I. I think we have a very strong team.
Fantastic. And obviously, a lot of folks who've been on the podcast have emphasized the team and culture is absolutely mission critical. In addition to science, it is of similar importance. If you have bad team culture or other things that could impair progress pretty significantly, and any advantages that you may have even from a scientific perspective.
Yeah, I'd add to that my experience in my previous life. When I was very junior, I thought that all these people talking about culture were just full of it, and it really didn't matter. And as I've gotten older, I realized much more of the wisdom of that culture is a thing that drives progress and drives all sorts of small decisions that everyone can't be involved in. And it's quite important, actually.
So I think that raises an interesting point, and to say, especially for your background, Travis, coming from Manhattan, Wall Street, at Goldman, and at a hedge fund, I think pretty significant reputation for having a very intense work culture, right? Very cutthroat, very long hours, sleepless nights, grinding for your clients. Obviously, I'm sure there's still a lot of hustle that goes on at a startup like Ovelle, but I am curious, what is your view on the difference? Obviously, the mission being a very big and important one of those, but what is your view on the difference in cultures between being at a major Wall Street bank versus at a biotech startup?
Well, I guess I would say the biggest difference is just sort of meaning versus money. People go to Wall Street, to be honest, to make money, at least most of the people there. And I think people in biotech mostly go into biotech for meaning, to have positive impact on other people's lives. And so I've been really impressed with the people in biotech and how they made their decisions to be here and their motivations for being here. And it's quite refreshing from after spending a lot of time on Wall Street.
Is there also a difference in terms of like the work ethos or like the day-to-day bit beyond just the mission itself?
Yeah, I'd say that um, the yeah, it's just like I would say it's a much more ruthless culture on Wall Street. You had the phrase like, "What have you done for me today?" And that was kind of how you were judged. And I think in biotech, especially in a place like Ovelle, where we're trying to pursue a long-term goal, it's much more, are we building the right culture, and are we hiring the right people, and are we building the right systems to be successful over the long term?
Yeah, I think when one experiment takes like 2 or 3 weeks, if you're trying to push out maximum results like every day, you might be losing out on long-term progress. But we definitely want to move as quickly as we can, right? It's just a matter of like, how do we actually work efficiently instead of like sprinting all the time and then running in circles.
Yeah, and I guess that may also go to like what your deliverables are, right? Having, working in the finance field myself, can definitely understand like you have a deliverable due in a week or in a few days versus, at a biotech startup, while there might be experiments or something that might be happening every day, of course, but you have a much longer time horizon, right? Like you're thinking about, I assume at least, 5-10 years in terms of what kind of impact you're going to have. Obviously, it's a lot of small steps along the way, but I view it as different, like versus like, we have something due next week for like an external client, and then you're done with that client, for example, or maybe it's it's a longer collaboration. But for science, right, like to have a concrete impact on fertility treatments, you have to have a much longer arc for how you're thinking about the work that you do, right?
Yeah, I think that totally makes sense, and we want to revolutionize infertility, and so we're trying to build from the ground up to have a company that will endure for the long term and also can innovate, because I think that there will be a lot of innovation in this field over the coming decades.
That's great. And so I just want to get a better sense of the mission. If you can tell us more about what your vision is, to the point of the long arc that we're talking about, 10 years in the future, how are you thinking about the role that in vitro gametogenesis can play in the infertility space broadly?
Yeah, so I think the mission of the company right now is to allow parents that want to have kids to be able to have those kids, and to make it more accessible to the extent we can to the people that already have other options. And that's quite a big goal, and it's quite hard to move the field forward. But yeah, that's the main mission of the company right now. And the way we do that is by making eggs from regular cells, because regular cells are very, very common and eggs are very, very rare. So hopefully we can make rare eggs more inexpensive and accessible.
And obviously you all have made some pretty impressive strides in that direction already. So I'm curious, maybe it's more for Merrick, in terms of can you give us our audience a better understanding of where you are today, right? You already outlined what your paper was and how you're able to achieve meiosis, and understanding which regulatory and transcription factors play a critical role in that. But in terms of where you are today, and to get to a point, and I think we talked about this before we really started this conversation formally, how do you go from where you are today to where you are actually able to implement this technology and utilize it more broadly?
Yeah, so basically an overview of in vitro gametogenesis basically starts out from stem cells. We then will activate meiosis in the stem cells, but meiosis isn't the only thing we need. We also need to form these things called ovarian follicles, which contain the cells in the middle, which are the egg precursors. These are the ones that are doing meiosis, but they're surrounded by these ovarian supporting cells, which basically provide them with nutrients and the proper hormonal signaling. So being able to form those follicles and then culture the follicles to make mature eggs is what our process looks like. We've made considerable progress in the ovarian supporting cell area as well. And basically what we need to do now is combine the supporting cells with the meiotic cells to make those reconstituted ovarian follicles. There's also these follicle culture methods that we're working on developing. I will also mention that the last step of this process, going from an immature egg to a mature egg, this is a separate thing called in vitro maturation, or IVM. And actually this has already been achieved in humans, resulting in even live births from this process. So it's really just a few stages in the middle around like follicle formation and follicle culture that we need to resolve in order to get this process working end to end.
Got it. So there are some technical challenges ahead, but it sounds like it's something where you all have made major strides in critical early elements, and that those subsequent steps sound like there will be technical developments there, but it sounds like they are achievable within the next few years.
Right. Yeah, I think definitely like it's not going to be trivial, but we have a good approach that can resolve these issues. Also, I should probably say that the first proof of concept egg is likely not going to be a super high quality egg. There's going to be a lot of like quality control and optimization that we do after making that first proof of concept before the point where this is actually safe enough to use for human reproduction. So that would include like trials in animal species like non-human primates, careful analysis of epigenetics and genome of the resulting eggs, things like that basically.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, thinking more from like a leadership perspective, what has been the biggest challenges that you've faced so far in starting Ovelle? How have you been handling those?
I think like there are a few things that come to mind. One is like prioritizing which science to work on. Because we can't work on everything at once. There's like a lot of interesting research directions that we've sort of put on the back burner to focus on the ones that are like more critical. But the question is like, how do you decide? I also add like Travis mentioned, I think hiring is definitely something that we spend a lot of time on, and like just finding good people is challenging, but we're lucky enough that we have found some good people, but it definitely was one of the things that was I would say more difficult than I expected. Travis, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think, given my background of building and managing technical teams, that part carried over pretty well, but the new thing about startup, like outside of finance, is how resource constrained you are. So sort of being able to prioritize what you're doing correctly is really, really important.
So how have you all been thinking about those kinds of priorities? Like obviously the mission is pretty clear, right? And obviously there's a lot of science to do to get there. But how do you think about prioritizing which experiments you're doing, or what's the most important next step when you have limited resources to do that with?
I think it's sort of like a critical path analysis type of situation where you think of like, okay, what is like the minimal steps we need to accomplish to get this to work, right? So for example, like, okay, we need to erase DNA methylation, we need to have meiosis happen, and then we need to have the eggs grow after meiosis to a large enough size with the correct epigenetics to be fertilized. Those are actually like the three basic things we need to do. There's various things that are like subcomponents of that, but anything that like doesn't directly relate to one of those is not something that we want to prioritize, basically. I think there's a lot of other things to work on in terms of like making the process work better, but I think right now our focus needs to be on just getting a proof of concept to work.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. So, and I think this kind of coincides with a broader topic that we've come up with a lot on the podcast, which is it's been a very challenging financing environment lately, right? So as of this recording, this is August of 2025, in quarter two, I think Series A financings have dropped a subsequent 30% for compared to quarter one. As part of our quarterly report we do at LooksWalk, we've seen that. How has that affected you all in terms of how you're prioritizing your experiments and how you're thinking about things?
I think that obviously the funding environment for biotech is difficult, primarily driven by the higher Fed funds rate, though there's obviously other things going on as well. the longer timelines of biotech means with a higher Fed funds rate means that these companies are worth less, essentially. But I think that we've been fairly lucky in that other people have made the same observation that I've had made, which is that IVF hasn't really improved for 45 years, and like we should try to put some money into this. And so there is investors that have had like the experiences I have had or similar experiences and want to find a solution for it. And so far that has been okay.
So finding like-minded investors and making sure that you are aligning your mission with their values.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that one of the important things we want to do is make sure that the investors have the same vision that we have. So, it's a partnership and it's a long-term partnership, and we want to make sure that everyone is going in the same direction.
Got it. And so what do you think was most persuasive to those investors? Was it connecting it to personal experiences? Was it something about the science that you all had that was most compelling to them? Was it more of what I'm trying to get at is it often using like the experiences that they personally have had to drive the connection point down? Or what I'm trying to get at is how can other entrepreneurs who may not necessarily be in the in vitro gametogenesis space take lessons from your experience in pitching? What do you think it was that connected your startup well to win these investors?
Well, I would say two things. One is do your homework. Like investors generally talk about what they're interested in publicly. So, if you just can compile a list of every investor who's mentioned interest in your field or your particular area, I think that's like a great place to start, because convincing people that are not interested to be interested is harder than convincing somebody who's interested to invest in you. So that's a good place to start. And then the other one is that Merrick is a great communicator, and between his papers and the church lab and other writings that he had on the internet, people had read it and learned about him, including myself. And so that was also another way to draw in investors. You gotta get known, you gotta be a presence, you gotta let other people be able to find you. And I would say, especially this day in AI, it's becoming more and more important because they read the entire internet. And if somebody's like, I'm interested in this area, and they ask ChatGPT, it's got to have read about you, or they're not going to know you're there. So
that makes a lot of sense. I was gonna say I consider fertility obviously a very important area, but I would say a relatively small one within biotech. So it sounds like you had to find the right groups of investors who are particularly passionate about fertility. Because, on the flip side, take, for example, someone who's developing a new cancer therapy, there's tons of investors that invest in that space, and then it's more about how you differentiate it versus you guys are in a very narrow space. So it's finding the right investors in the first place who are willing to take that bet.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And I will say, if we succeed, I think fertility will get a lot bigger in terms of the investment space.
I agree, and I certainly hope so. Because, and I think this does have some intersection with women's health too, right? Because a lot of this is focused on women-specific fertility solutions. Women's health is, generally speaking, I'd argue, a very underinvested area. If you think beyond just cancers that affect women like breast cancer, ovarian cancer, or autoimmune diseases that more likely affect women, thinking of like rheumatoid arthritis, if you think about women's health and women's fertility specifically, it's very underinvested and underrepresented area, generally speaking, within biotech as a whole.
Yeah.
But I also think that, bringing my professional investor hat to the table, like generally, if you can do it, you want to be contrarian. As Peter Thiel says, you want to invest in the place that other people aren't investing, because there's just probably more there than trying to find the 10th AI company that doesn't have a huge valuation.
So to the point, this is a relatively small field. How are you all connected to other folks in the ecosystem of improving fertility treatments? Generally speaking, I've heard of like Gameto and some other companies out there. How is the ecosystem like? Are you all supportive of each other, or is it just like you all swim in different lanes? How is that working so far?
Yeah, so you mentioned Gameto. So Gameto is actually, it comes from the same lab. So Christian, their chief scientific officer, was working together with me. We worked together on the ovarian supporting cells during my PhD. Gameto, as I mentioned, there's another process called IVM, in vitro maturation, which is taking immature eggs that are from a patient and helping them to mature to the point where they can be fertilized. And that's what Gamito is working on. They're also, I believe, working on a few things like therapies for menopause using ovarian supporting cells. I would say that we are largely working independently. I think our mission is pretty distinct from what they're trying to do. Christian is someone I would still consider a friend, but we're not working together very closely.
And I was really meaning, and that's great context, I was meaning more generally rather than Gamito specifically. What is the ecosystem like? Are entrepreneurs supporting entrepreneurs in the space because it's so small?
Yeah, I mean, it's so small that it's really just a couple companies. I mean, in IVG in the US, maybe there's 2 or 3 that are pursuing somewhat different approaches to try to get there. And, we all know each other. We're all supportive. We hope somebody's able to make it. But the space is so small that it's not really like an industry association or anything like this.
Yeah, and hopefully to the point that y'all are making, and that you're able to drive some success in the field, that there will be industry associations for in vitro gametogenesis in the future, and I certainly hope that that is the case someday. All right, so to wrap up, let's go through some quick fire questions. This will be to both of you, so both of you can answer each question. So first, what is one hobby outside of biotech that brings you joy? Let's start with you, Travis.
Right now, unfortunately, I don't have any hobbies because I moved from New York to Boston at the beginning of this month. And I also have 2 small kids, is the reason I'm here. And I can assure you, the new parents will know this, that having 2 small kids at home is a full-time job in and of itself. So it's mostly taking them to the parks and taking them to play dates and making sure they're healthy and happy and having a good life and doing a startup on top of it. So
all-consuming life passions then.
Yeah.
As for me, I would say my one hobby, which I again don't spend a ton of time on these days, is building airplanes and rockets in Kerbal Space Program. There's like a Discord server that runs competitions for these that I take part in. But yeah, that's basically it.
I guess I would say in my previous life before I came to Boston, I did some improv actually in New York City. It's called the Upright Citizens Brigade, and so that was a great experience, and is meet a different set of people, like aspiring actors and comedians in New York City outside of finance, so a completely different walk of life. So that was fun, but I haven't found anything like that in Boston yet.
I should also mention I have a biology blog that I like to write on.
Actually, I might want to dig in a little bit on both of those. So, improv, there is an Improv Asylum in Boston as well, which I believe is near me in North End. So I live near North End.
That'd be great.
It's a good time. There's Improv Boston and Cambridge too.
Right.
But that sounds like a lot of fun. Do you feel like improv has helped you in your communication skills? Because I'm assuming you're doing things where you feel like you're kind of embarrassing yourself a little bit on stage, right? Like you have to have like a good sense of humor. You got to be okay with making a flub, messing up, and just rolling with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think improv is great for me. Like, not only just like being able to mess up and roll with it or whatever, but to be able to truly, deeply understand what somebody is telling you in real time, and to be able to, what in improv is famous yes and, so to be able to add on to that is actually quite a difficult skill. But it's something that when you do well, it's just like a magical creation comes out of nothing. So that was great.
That's fantastic. And Merrick, in terms of your blog, I've heard a lot of think pieces. Frank David, who's a mentor to me, posted about this on LinkedIn, about how writing your own blog really helps sharpen your point of view. So I'm curious on what your experience has been with that.
Yeah, so the blog is called De Novo. It's on Substack. I've basically used it to just write about what I'm interested in. So everything from like virology to gene drives to, of course, in vitro gametogenesis stuff. And I think recently I've also done some writing for Asimov Press as well. Things like the history of the micropipette I just like to write about what I'm interested in, and I don't really view it as like I need to do it. It's just something that's good to get my thoughts out, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like it helps you refine your thoughts or think more deeply about a topic versus before you write a blog?
There's definitely times where like I read a paper, I think, oh, this is really interesting. I want to write a blog post about it, and writing about it sort of makes me understand the paper a bit more deeply. So yeah, I would say that's generally true.
Excellent. All right, not so quick fire, but next quick fire question is: what is your favorite sci-fi book or movie? Well, this time let's start with you, Merrick.
I would say Dune. Both the book and I think also the movie was really good.
And what about you, Travis?
I also love Dune, but in the interest of diversity, I'll pick out The Wheel of Time, which I read when I was younger, and I thought that Robert Jordan just made this amazing world of, force of imagination.
Excellent. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
Probably time travel, because I feel like it would be the most useful, and you could do a lot of research and then redo the research until you get to where you want to go.
Yeah, it's basically the same for me. Being a startup founder, you make a lot of mistakes, and you're like, man, I wish I could have just gone in the future and seen that wasn't going to go well ahead of time. So I would ask for that too, to be able to see what the consequences of my decisions would be ahead of time would be an amazing superpower for a startup founder.
Amazing. And hopefully it didn't create too many parallel universes while you're in the process of it.
Exactly.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
So for me, I would say it would be applying for a Churchill scholarship. So in undergrad, I was, as I said, mainly doing chemistry. But one of my friends was doing the scholarship at Cambridge, which is like a one-year master's program. And he suggested that I apply for this. So I did, and I decided to put my application that I wanted to do stem cells and in vitro gametogenesis research, because I thought it would be a good time to sort of pivot. And I was lucky enough to be awarded a scholarship, so I would say that was what kickstarted my whole scientific career. So yeah, basically apply for that scholarship.
I would say that the best piece of advice I got on Wall Street, at least from a professional perspective, was to read this book called So Good They Can't Ignore You. And you don't really need to read the book. You can just read the title. But it's how you really get rewarded in your career for being so good that people can't ignore you. So having a world-respected expertise like Merrick in an area, it really helps you get where you want to go professionally.
Great. And Merrick, any chance you have a book you'd recommend?
I recently read sort of an interview with Yamanaka, like around the time he won the Nobel Prize. I forget what it was called, but basically it outlined his sort of vision of how he does science. Basically, it's like you need to have a clear like scientific vision of what you want to achieve, and then you need to basically like do the work to make it happen. It's obviously like I'm not doing a good job explaining it. You should go read the book. But I would say that one it's relatively short, and I think it has like a good amount of inspiration in terms of like how to achieve science. There's also a famous talk by Hamming, I believe, called like You and Your Research. It's not a book, but I definitely recommend reading that as well. He had the habit of going around people asking what the most important problems in their field were, and then as a follow-up, why weren't you working on them?
Those are excellent questions. And then the last question is, if you couldn't work in biotech or science, what unrelated career would you have?
Well, I guess we answered this for me. I would have a finance career, I suppose. But I really am grateful that for the sort of second half of my life, I can work in biotech and I can do science because I love both and have a big impact.
For me, probably it would be some sort of like engineering, like robotics or something like that. I did a lot of that in high school. I know it's like a little bit like science, but it's not really like, I wouldn't call it necessarily science, I'd say.
Excellent. Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining the podcast today, Merrick and Travis.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to the Nucleate Podcast. Be sure to subscribe if you'd like to keep up with future episodes. See you next time.